When fitness influencers tell you that all diet approaches work through a calorie deficit, and if you just get through a calorie deficit, you will lose body fat, it's a problem. Hey, everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. But a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below, it would be greatly appreciated. If you're not following or subscribed, please do so and drop me a comment with your own experience with this. All right, this kind of frustrates me to no end because the fact of the matter is, yes, it's obviously true, number one. Number two, it's also obviously true that counting your calories isn't necessary to lose 50 or 100 pounds. Okay, so this is the problem we run into, and I think it's really an issue when fitness personalities who've never been fat, they've never been obese, start with this and they say, well, you know, this diet only works, it all works through a calorie deficit. As long as you eat a calorie deficit, you can eat whatever you want, and you can eat, work in whatever treats, whatever junk food. They always say this stuff, right? And you can tell they have never been fat. You can tell they have never been fat a day in their life. I have been over 300 pounds before I got into lifting. So I kind of know the difference here. Now, is it obviously true that other than burning very small amounts of fat through recomposition, which can be done without a deficit, but you're not going to lose 20 pounds. Okay, we need to be clear. You're going to lose a pound possibly here or there with recomping. Yeah, that can be done without a deficit, but any significant fat loss, or particularly the scale going down beyond water weight, sure, of course it requires a calorie deficit. It's basic biology, right? This is understood. However, the point that they are missing with some of this is people have to deal with their appetites. And a lot of the very popular dietary approaches or structured approaches that people take, whether they choose to do, the higher fat, lower carbohydrate, hopefully with healthier fats, not some bacon butter nonsense, or they choose to do a really low fat diet or a brown rice and chicken and vegetable diet, or a paleo diet, whatever approach it is that they are attempting to use. Okay, there's a reason these become popular. They become popular because they're easier for people to reach the calorie deficit. And I think when they're giving this advice, they're forgetting that, number one, calories in and calories out are not always equated. In other words, people say, oh, you just have to find your calorie maintenance and just eat a small deficit or whatever, without factoring in that what you eat will determine your maintenance. In other words, and I think people miss this point big time, and we know this from various overfeeding studies, okay, your calorie maintenance could vary 500, 700, 800 calories just based upon what you are physically eating. Okay, the thermic effect of your food, the nutrient partitioning of your food affects that. In other words, if you are eating specific foods with a low thermic effect, right? Very low thermic effect, not much happening in terms of nutrient partitioning and stuff. Your maintenance might be, 2,700 calories doing a given amount of exercise. But if you eat different foods, it might be 3,200. It could be big. It can be significant. And I think people forget that your energy output and your exercise ability is going to be affected by what you eat also. So not just a thermic effect, but these other things. So no, it isn't that simple. And I think when they say this stuff, a lot of them are then implying, oh, you can just eat, work this junk in and you can work the treats in and enjoy the foods that you want in moderation, except that they're going to negatively affect the calories out. Okay. Versus if you just ate whole foods that have a high thermic effect, either lots of fiber. Fiber actually increases thermic effect and energy out, or more protein affects energy out. And they're not factoring in the satiety factor. And this is the problem when they make these suggestions, and it's simply about that. When the reality is, when you're dealing with people who struggle with being overweight or who have various binge eating issues, it's not simply a matter of counting their calories as the solution. They have to have structured, I am one of those people, have to have some sort of structured approach to control intake, to control appetite. And that means certain foods, like picking bulky, high satiety foods. In other words, watermelon or potatoes being an example of still, calorie foods that we can function on, because you're not going to live on broccoli, guys. Sorry. I could say vegetables and things. Sure, they'll fill you up, but you also may not get enough energy. But let's say we're picking something like that. and you look at the food volume or the satiety of, say, 500 calories of watermelon or cantaloupe or potatoes. Okay, these are phenomenal foods. Why? Because they're bulky, yet they still have great, there's still enough energy density that you can use them as real calories, but they have a very high satiation. They're hard to overeat. They make you feel full. They have a lot of stomach volume, okay? While still being pretty flavorful. I mean, potatoes aren't bad. Even boiled potatoes really aren't that bad. Watermelon, cantaloupe, great. Berries, stuff like this. Versus, hey, let's try to eat 500 calories of cake and work that in, or ice cream. Okay, you have to understand that difference. It's an enormous difference. So when they say these things, with the point they're missing is you're spitting the obvious truth, but you're not giving it to people in a practical, pragmatic manner. You can't just drop that, and people do that and they act like they're dropping some magic revelation, but it's like the person has successfully lost 25 pounds already following the approach that you're making fun of or saying is unnecessary, and they're being successful, and they're still possibly eating a healthy whole foods. Okay, and so then this person is messing with their success by pointing this out, when the reality is they were doing just fine without you, Mr. Goofball Influencer, who wants them to eat, Ben & Jerry's ice cream every day or whatever nonsense you're promoting. They were doing just fine without you, following this other approach. And I get it if it's a harmful approach, like you could say, hey, doing that version of keto you're doing, eating all that bacon and butter, probably not ideal. You should probably have some vegetables in there and get rid of some of that. Okay, I get that if they're doing something potentially harmful in the long term. But if they're not, and they just happen to be, oh, you're silly paleo or whatever you're doing, it's like, well, the guy's over here eating lean cuts of steak and potatoes and vegetables. You know what? The person's over here eating sweet potatoes and a fairly lean sirloin steak, with a few vegetables on the side, and they're being successful, and you're calling it out saying, really, you don't have to do all these steps, but they might have been doing it without even counting calories. And it's working. So why does this influencer need to knock it? Is that they try to show their superior knowledge, but they don't show a practical application. What we need to be telling people is, yes, calories matter, but it's a lot easier to eat a calorie deficit if you eat all these filling foods. In fact, it's a lot easier if you don't worry about any of this, oh, I'm going to do 20% junk food, all this nonsense in moderation. For people who've been fat, that is actually way more difficult. For people who have serious appetite issues, okay, that's more difficult for the majority, for probably 70% of them. So just stop and let people use their structured high satiety whole foods diets in peace. Or at least educate them while doing it. They do need to look at satiety.